Barakatah Yahweh, Barakatah Yahawashi, Bahasham, Barakahak Wadash, Barakatum. First and foremost, I want to give all praises, glory, and infinite honors to Yahweh, Bahasham, Yahawashi. Double honors to the apostles and elders, a great millstone who rule and teach well. In peace and salutations to you sincere Akim out there, pushing this word in truth and sincerity to the four corners of the globe. May you brothers endure until the end. This is the brother Ra'aya coming at you with another lesson. And I'm going to start it off in Micah chapter 4, verses 1 to 3. But in the last days it shall come to pass that the mountain of the house of Yahweh shall be established in the tops of the mountains, and it shall be exalted above the hills. And in the scriptures, mountains and hills can be symbolic for, bigger governments, smaller governments. So what this is saying is that the mountain of the house of Yahweh, the kingdom of Israel, the kingdom of heaven, will be the sole power, and that all other nations, as it says, and people shall flow unto it. It's going to be the sole power that's going to rule over every other nation on the face of the earth, and the power to whom the nations are going to come to seek guidance and how to function, from. Verse 2, and many heathen nations shall come and say, come and let us go up to the mountain of Yahweh and to the house of the power of Jacob, and he will teach us of his ways, and we will walk in his paths. Again, the nations coming up to the Israelites to learn of their ways and to follow after them. For the law shall go forth of Zion, and the word of Yahweh from Jerusalem. And he shall judge among many people, and rebuke strong nations afar off. And they shall beat their swords into plowshares, and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up a sword against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore. And that's another thing. When the kingdom of Israel is established, these heathen nations wouldn't be fighting each other anymore, and there wouldn't be wars. So, with all that being said, when we look at those people over in the Holy Land right now, do they fit this prophecy dealing with the children of Israel being in the Holy Land? No, because there's still wars going on. These different nations aren't learning after the ways of those people, and the law damn sure isn't going forth from that land. So, who are those people then? Well, they are actually of the nation of Esau Edom, the so-called white man, more specifically of the tribe of Amalek, which this is the prophecy that they do fit in regards to people being in the Holy Land. This is Ezekiel 36 verse 5. Therefore, thus saith the Lord Yahweh, surely in the fire of my jealousy have I spoken against the residue of the heathen, and against all Idumea, which is the Greek way of saying Edom, which have appointed my land into their possession, with the joy of all their heart, with despiteful minds, to cast it out for a prey. And when you look at how those Amalekite Edomites got that land, it was clearly appointed into their hands. The groundwork was set with the Balfour Declaration after World War I, and then after World War II, with the help of the U.S. and the newly created United Nations. They had their Israeli Declaration of Independence declared, and they started really going into that land. And immediately you had the 1948 Arab-Israeli War. Then in the 60s, you had the 6 Days War, many other wars since then. And fast forward to today, you've currently got that war in Gaza, really that slaughter. So going back to that Micah 4 verse 3, hey, the nations are still learning war, making weapons, and getting ready to go against each other for the final war, World War III. And also, again, the law isn't going forth from that land, because if it was, Tel Aviv would not be known as Pink City, one of the pride hotspots on the face of the earth. And you should know what the law has to say about sodomites. And then on top of that, these nations aren't learning after their ways nor seeking guidance from them. Growing numbers of nations and peoples all across the planet are condemning those Amalekite Edomites for how they're treating those Palestinian, so-called Arabs, really Ishmaelites. Which brings me to a few bits of information I'll be going into with this video. With the first article I'll be going to being on BBC.com. France will recognize Palestinian state, Macron says. So, if those Amalekite Edomites were the people of the book, these nations wouldn't have any issues with what they were doing towards those Palestinians, and they'd be applauding them, to fully, take their, land back. France will officially recognize a Palestinian state in September, President Emmanuel Macron has said, which will make it the first G7 nation to do so. In a post on X, Macron said the formal announcement would be made at a session of the UN General Assembly in New York. The urgent need today is for the war in Gaza to end and for the civilian population to be rescued. Peace is possible. We need an immediate ceasefire, the release of all hostages, and massive humanitarian aid to the people in Gaza, he wrote. Palestinian officials welcomed Macron's decision, while war criminal, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, really Benjamin Milkowski, said the move rewards terror following Hamas' 7th October 2023 attack in Israel. And hey, at this point, what those Amalekites are doing to those Palestinians is, eclipsing what, the Austrian painter did during World War II to those Amalekite Edomites. It's a slaughter. It's a genocide over there. And, these nations and, a lot of these people are getting fed up with it. It's just these dickless cowards in America who are nothing but a bitch, a lapdog on their knees, especially Donald Trump, for those Amalekite Edomites that are still trying to hold up this ruse. The U.S., of course, strongly rejects Macron's announcement, Secretary of State Marco Rubio said, calling the decision reckless. The G7 is a group of major industrialized nations which, alongside France, includes the US, the UK, Italy, Germany, Canada, and Japan. In his Thursday post on X, Macron wrote, "True to its historic commitment to a just and lasting peace in the Middle East." More bullshit, because, even though Macron is saying France is going to, recognize a Palestinian state, at the end of the day, they are Edomites as well. And just look up Sykes-Picot, which, was a plan enacted after World War I, which balkanized, the so-called Middle East, really Western Asia, and created a lot of these modern states you see today, like, Iraq, Syria, Iran, all these things, which, led to a lot of that divisions you're currently seeing, which, these European nations and the U.S. still exploit unto this day. So just because France is trying to come to some kind of appeasement doesn't mean they're the good guys either. We must also guarantee the demilitarization of Hamas and a secure and rebuild Gaza. Finally, we must build the state of Palestine, ensure its viability, and ensure that by accepting its demilitarization and fully recognizing Israel, it contributes to the security of all in the Middle East. There is no alternative. Now I'm going to jump around just to hit some points. Currently, the state of Palestine is recognized by more than 140 of the 193 member states of the UN. A few European Union countries, including Spain and Ireland, are among them. But Israel's main supporter, the US and its allies, including the UK, have not recognized a Palestinian state. In a statement Thursday, UK Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer said he will hold an emergency call with French and German leaders on Friday to discuss what we can do to urgently stop the killing. But as of recently, and this is a clip from ABC News' YouTube
we have
channel.
Breaking news. British
titled
Prime Minister Keir.
Shut up, bitch. UK to recognize Palestinian state unless Israel agrees to ceasefire. So now you've got another major European nation talking about recognizing a Palestinian state. And as we saw in that last article, 140 out of 193 of the UN nations, seek to recognize a Palestinian state. So back to that Micah chapter 4, verse 2, if those Amalekite Edomites were the people of the Most High, then there wouldn't be any of these issues taking place. They'd be laying down on their backs for Israel like the United States of America is doing. But this is a fair use copyright disclaimer. I do not own any of the footage in this clip, nor do I stand to gain from it monetarily. It is simply for educational purposes.
We have breaking news. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer says the UK will recognize a Palestinian state unless Israel agrees to a ceasefire. Last week, French President Emmanuel Macron announced his country will recognize a Palestinian state in September. Now, Starmer says the UK will follow suit if Israel doesn't move toward peace.
So today, as part of this process towards peace, I can confirm the UK will recognise the State of Palestine by the United Nations General Assembly in September, unless the Israeli government takes substantive steps to end the appalling situation in Gaza, agree to a ceasefire, and commit to a long-term sustainable peace, reviving the prospect of a two-state solution.
Foreign correspondent Tom Sufi-Burridge is here with the latest. Tom, Saudi Arabia and France are sort of working together to try to generate momentum for this support for a Palestinian state. Do you think the increased international pressure on that front could move Israel closer to a ceasefire deal?
Unclear, really. I mean, I think at the moment we're not seeing that any of this international criticism is impacting the position of the Israeli government. On the humanitarian side, yes. I mean, I think the Israeli government has now taken steps in the last few days, although I was just on a briefing with aid agencies and they say that it is nowhere near addressing what they say is famine playing out on the ground in Gaza. But I think it's an important move by the UK government. I don't think it was necessarily expected that Sir Keir Starmer would make this move and basically say that he will, in September, like the French, recognise a Palestinian state. But he's putting a caveat on it. He is saying that he'll do that if Israel doesn't go for a ceasefire and also alleviate the situation on the ground. And he's saying that his move has been driven not only by the dire humanitarian picture on the ground, the images of malnourished children, of starving children, and people right across the Gaza Strip, but also by this. Also, he says he believes that the idea, that the notion of a two-state solution, Israel and Palestine, is at risk of disappearing. And he says those two factors together have driven him to make this move.
Hey, those Amalekite Edomites are further tarnishing the image of these Edomites as a whole. That they're the good guys, that they've got everybody's and the world's best interests at heart, because it's a complete slaughter over there. So they're doing what they can to save face. And, while this is major that you've got two of the biggest powers in, NATO and the EU, with France and the UK, going against, Israel and vis-a-vis the US in supporting a Palestinian state. At the end of the day, they're still Edomites as well. So, it's a wait and see what truly comes from it. But, regardless, it's a major statement being made and just further backs up that Micah chapter 4, showing that those Amalekite Edomites aren't the true people. Because like I've been saying throughout the video, if they were, everybody would be following them in any decision they were making. So, the true children of Israel, are known as the so-called Negroes, Latinos, and Native Americans today, who, once we are back in power, the nations will flow unto us, and we will teach them the correct way of doing things. But, besides this cutting those Amalekite Edomites, hey, it also fulfills prophecy showing, the division amongst these Edomites that would be taking place in the last days in their final power structure. This is Daniel chapter 2. I'm going to start at verse 40. And this is dealing with the statue of a man made of different metals that King Nebuchadnezzar of the Neo-Babylonian Empire saw in his dream that the prophet Daniel interpreted. And those different metals and parts of that statue represented the last heathen kingdoms that would be ruling before the kingdom of heaven. So I'm going to go to Daniel 2 verse 40, which is dealing with those legs of iron. And as the header says, Rome, the ancient pagan Edomite Roman Empire, and the fourth kingdom shall be strong as iron, for as much as iron breaketh in pieces and subdueth all things, and as iron that breaketh all these, shall it break in pieces and bruise. And now we're going into the last leg of the fourth beast, the final heathen kingdom that would rule before the kingdom of heaven, those iron toes mixed with miry clay. And whereas thou sawest the feet and toes, part of potter's clay and part of iron. And this is speaking of this NATO EU system that the U.S. is a part of and at the head of, the reincarnated Roman Empire, which had its, humble, demonic beginnings during the Renaissance when the Edomites started coming back into power. And, Renaissance means rebirth, the rebirth of that Roman way into the world. And then, the final, dots and lines were put to it after World War II with the establishment of, the full establishment of this system as you see it today. And whereas thou sawest the feet and toes, part of potter's clay and part of iron, the kingdom shall be divided. And that iron and clay can go into a few things. On the one hand, the iron can represent NATO, which is the military aspect, and the clay can represent the European Union, which is the economic aspect. And when you go into Habakkuk chapter 2, around the 6th verse, and you go into that word clay in the Strongs, it goes into debts or pledges, going into economics and money. And then on the other hand, it can go into the iron being the stronger nations like your U.S., the British, the French, the Germans, and the weaker nations being what are usually referred to as the pigs, Portugal, Italy, Ireland, Greece, and Spain. But as it said, the kingdom shall be divided. And regardless how this whole acceptance of a Palestinian state thing plays out, hey, we can clearly see that in the mainstream, divisions are being shown. And then on top of this issue, you've got a whole host of other issues that has America and her European allies at odds with each other. But there shall be in it of the strength of iron, for as much as thou sawest the iron mixed with miry clay. And as the toes of the feet were part of iron and part of clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly broken. And we're coming into the times to where it's going to be completely broken. And America's European allies are going to turn against her at some point during World War III and ally themselves with, nations like Russia and China. And they're going to be involved in shooting missiles onto, the United States. And hey, missiles are going to be shot on the land of Israel as well to cleanse it. And, outside of the Palestinian issue, another major issue that's going to, lead to that final, backstab is Israel is going to drag in the U.S. and these NATO nations into World War III against, Iran and Russia. And as it says in Jeremiah 49, verse 20, the least of the flock shall draw them out. And they're going to be getting all that smoke because of it. And, hey, that's, at some point, that's when they're going to do their heel turn on the U.S. But now I'm going to close out in Mark chapter 3, verses 24 to 25. And this is Yahushua, the Son of the Most High, whom the world ignorantly refers to as so-called Jesus speaking. And if a kingdom be divided against itself, the kingdom shall be part of clay and part of iron, and the kingdom shall be divided. That kingdom cannot stand. And, with this issue, amongst a whole host of other issues from economics, Ukraine, the tariffs, you name it, we can see that this NATO EU system is divided. And as I said, if a kingdom be divided against itself, that kingdom cannot stand. And if a house or a race be divided against itself, that house cannot stand. And we can see that these Edomites, outside of those Amalekite Edomites, those 1948ers, hey, there's divisions amongst them. And it's only going to grow until this kingdom and house falls completely and never rises again. But that's it with this video. And with this video, I hope you sincere Akim and Akwath were edified. Just keep strong. We are almost out of this final wicked captivity of the heathen nations, chiefly of the Edomites. And as always, I'm going to say Abad Babol, Kwam Yasharallah, and until next time, Shalom.